15 Shocking Details About the 4 on the Floor Murders, Part 1. If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video. 1. Eddie Nash and Gregory Diles. Eddie Nash and Gregory Diles were both arrested and charged in 1988 for the 4 on the Floor murders. They were tried twice between 1990 and 1991. The first trial was met by a hung jury 11-1, but Nash later confessed to bribing the holdout juror. The second trial in 91 ended with an acquittal, but this was not the end of Nash's legal woes in relation to the murders. Gregory Diles died in 1995, and unfortunately he was not around to be charged again with Nash in 2000. Authorities were not ready to let the murders go unpunished and dragged Nash from his home in his pajamas for what they thought was drugs, but was later found to be a mothball. He was tried again for the murders after being arrested in 2000 for charges that included racketeering, money laundering, and tampering of the witness from 1990. At the time he was 78. He pled guilty for some of the charges including conspiracy of the 4 on the Floor murders, in return for a lesser sentence. He was ordered to 36 months, but was released early for health reasons. Nash never admitted to ordering the deaths of the Wonderland gang. He only admitted to sending his men to retrieve the goods stolen from him, yet also claimed that it could have led to violence, which might have resulted in death. 2. The acquittal of John Holmes. John Holmes spilled most of the shocking details to detectives when he was first picked up for the murders. He was protected by law enforcement and kept at a hotel along with his wife, Sharon Holmes, and his girlfriend, Dawn Schiller. He refused to give up the names of the people that committed the murders and refused to testify. They turned the trio loose without protection. Sharon and Dawn dyed his hair and he spray-painted his van. Holmes and Dawn went on the run, but she later turned him in and began using drugs and beat her again. Detectives felt Holmes knowingly led Nash's men back to Wonderland Avenue, despite knowing that Diles and the others intended to kill the gang members. They tried him for the murders based on his bloody handprint, but he was acquitted of the charges. He did do some time as a result of stolen property charges and for contempt of court after refusing to testify. He only served 8 months, but died of complications from AIDS in 1988. His new wife, Laurie Holmes, made sure all of his parts were intact before he was cremated, just as he requested. 3. The victims. The video shows Barbara Richardson first, whose head was covered and soaking in a puddle of blood. Barbara was still wrapped in a blanket on the floor just beside the couch. It appears as if she had just rolled off the couch during the attack. Ron Lanius, who was still on the bed covered up, was also covered in blood and unrecognizable. Susan Lanius was removed and rushed to the hospital before the video footage began, but the video shows the blood-stained wall, where she was found in the room with Ron. Billy Deverell and Joy Miller were found in another room. Joy was on the bed, but the room was ransacked so badly that her body was covered with the debris. Billy was against the wall, also soaked in his own blood. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The victims' faces were beaten so badly that fingerprints were used to determine identity. 4. The crime scene. Upon entering the home at Wonderland Avenue, the veteran officers of the LAPD were so shocked that they began calling them the 4 on the Floor murders. The crime wasn't called the Wonderland Murders until after the media got a hold of the news. The officers were quick to compare the scene with the Tate LaBianca from a few years back. They began videotaping as they walked through the townhome doing their investigation. The townhome was ransacked. Many of the beds and floors were covered with books, papers, drawers, clothes, and even tools. The lights and televisions were left on, giving the scene an eerie look. There was drug paraphernalia all through the house on nightstands and tables. There was blood splatter soaked into the bed, carpet and walls. All of the bodies were left either in the bed or on the floors where they died. The video footage was later used in court and can now be seen on YouTube, but it is very graphic. 5. Neighbors ignored screams. Neighbors claimed to hear noises, but this was normal for that particular address on Wonderland Avenue. The Wonderland gang was well known for their eccentric partying. Rock music was always playing loudly around the clock. One neighbor recalled hearing screams around 4 a.m., but turned up the volume on the TV to drown out the sounds. Another neighbor awoke hearing a male voice screaming, "Please don't kill me," and went back to sleep. The autopsy reports claimed that a mover heard sounds, went to investigate, saw the door ajar, and left. In the afternoon, more movers came to the neighbor's house, and 3 people leaving the scene mentioned bodies. It was finally noticed that something might be wrong, and the police were called around 4 p.m. This was a shocking 12 hours from the time the initial cries for help were heard. It turned out that the moans were coming from a badly battered and bludgeoned Susan Lanius, who was barely clinging onto her life. 6. The 4-on-the-floor murders. The shocking murders were said to have been carried out as retaliation for the robbery, but only 3 of the conspirators were killed. Holmes rang the buzzer and was allowed entry along with Dials and at least one more of Nash's thugs. Everyone in the town home had been beaten unrecognizable just before dawn on July 1, 1981. The other 2 victims were only considered to be guests at the town home on Wonderland Avenue. Susan Lanius, who was Ron Lanius' estranged wife, had come to visit him, and Barbara Richardson, who got left behind by Lind when he went to the hotel. The police who arrived at the crime scene described it as being bloodier and more gruesome than the Tate LaBianca murders carried out by the Manson family. Susan Lanius was the only surviving victim, while her husband Ron Lanius, Billy Deverell, Joy Miller and Barbara Richards were all found dead at the scene. 7. A forced participant. Holmes may have been smart enough to leave Wonderland Avenue, but what he did afterwards was really shocking and rather dumb. Not only did he stick around town, but he was also picked up by Dials while wearing a ring stolen from Nash in the robbery. Holmes was beaten once they got him in front of Nash. The beating was witnessed by Scott Thorson, who later testified about the Holmes beating in order to connect Nash to the 4-on-the-floor murders. Nash also took Holmes' address book and threatened the lives of his family and friends in the event that Holmes refused to lead his men to the Wonderland gang. Holmes was allegedly forced to participate and/or watch the murders. Investigators found John Holmes' bloody handprint on the headboard above Ron Lanius' body after the murders. 8. World's dumbest criminals. No offense meant to the people who lost their lives back then, but they should have expected some retaliation. They knew that Nash wasn't likely to call the cops and report a stash of cash, drugs and guns missing, but why would they stay at the town home on Wonderland Avenue? It was less than 2 miles from the Nash residence, plus Holmes, who they ripped off on the take, knew exactly where it was. Only 2 of the people involved with the robbery were clever enough to leave the town home behind. Tracy McCourt was one of the smart ones, although he was also shorted on the take. That didn't stop him from leaving as soon as he got his cut. Holmes left after an argument about his cut. Lynn got lucky on the night of the murders and ended up at a hotel with a male prostitute named Sheila Watts, who he stayed with on the night of the murders. McCourt later testified that the entire group was supposed to move after the robberies, and that he didn't understand why the others stayed.